Julius Caesar, From Soldier to Eternal Legend. The Untold Story, Chapter 1, Whispers of Destiny, 100 to 84 BC. Summer light poured over Rome in 100 BC when a child was born into the patrician gens, Julia, a family that claimed the bloodline of Venus herself. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar. Before he would march legions across continents and force a republic to face its own reflection, he was a boy listening to the thunder of politics outside his door, learning that in Rome, power was not a staircase but a cliff. The boy beneath the laurel, 100 to 90 BC. In the Subura's crisscross of streets, where patrician marble met plebeian dust, young Julius breathed the air of a city that was both empire and argument. His father, Gaius Julius Caesar, the elder, wore a magistrate's toga. His mother, Aurelia Cotta, wielded something rarer, clarity of mind and an iron patience that could still a household. Servants whispered that Aurelia's eyes missed nothing, that even the corners of a room behaved when she entered. The family's pride was an old rumor turned into faith. The Julii traced their ancestry to Aeneas, son of Venus. It was a lineage less about proof than permission to dream dangerously. Rome rewarded men who acted as if destiny already owed them interest. When Julius learned to read, he also learned to watch. He watched the Forum, the markets where words were traded faster than grain, and the Capitoline, where oaths were sworn to gods who were also political allies. He heard names hissed with envy or shouted with devotion: Marius, Sulla, Cinna. He absorbed the lesson that would never leave him. Victory is a story the victors teach the city to recite. A shadow named Marius, c. 90 to 86 BC. To Rome, Gaius Marius was a titan, conqueror of the Cimbri and Teutones, the architect of legionary reforms that armed poverty with purpose. To Julius, Marius was family, his mother's kin, and a living example that a man could re-engineer both army and fate. When Marius visited, the household shifted around him like metal around a magnet. Veterans came to the door with scars and gratitude. Senators sent notes edged with caution. Julius listened as Marius described soldiers drawn from the Capita Censi, the head count poor, trained into a machine of discipline. The idea smoldered inside the boy, that organization could outlive noble birth, that could outmaneuver custom. He began to imitate the tone of commanders when he played at war with neighborhood boys. He organized teams, delegated, experimented with ambushes behind garden walls. Aurelia, amused, let the games proceed. Rome's streets had already enrolled her son in a far older academy. When the house fell silent, 84 BC, grief wears an exact date. In 84 BC, when Julius was about 16, his father died. The house fell silent, and responsibility, that invisible crown, landed on a teenager's brow. The slaves waited for instructions. Debts wanted paying. Alliances needed tending. The laurel wreath on the household altar suddenly looked less like tradition and more like expectation. Funerals in Rome were theater and theology, a procession of wax masks, mourners hired to make grief audible, and the family's future quietly negotiated among the living. Julius stood where his father might have stood and realized the city would now look through him to see the Julii. The boy's signature would carry adult consequences. In mourning, Aurelia did what Roman matrons of caliber did. She calculated. She tightened the household, audited favors owed, and taught her son a skill more vital than swordplay: composure. Rome tested men twice, once in the Forum and once at home. Julius learned to keep his voice level, to let silence multiply the weight of his words. This was the chapter's climax. Not a battle, but the sudden transfer of gravity. The boy felt Rome's hand on his shoulder and learned it was heavy. Between two fires, 83 to 82 BC. No sooner had Julius's household stabilized than Rome itself began to tilt. The rivalry between Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, once a tension the city could joke about, turned into a civil war the city would bleed for. Marius returned from exile with vengeance braided into his laurels. Sulla marched from the east with legions that answered to him before they answered to the Senate. Streets remembered footsteps. The Tiber remembered bodies. Rome learned what it meant to be both capital and battlefield. In the storm's early noise, Julius made a decision that was not entirely his own. He married Cornelia, daughter of Lucius Cornelius Cinna, a Marian ally. The match was politics braided with affection. Cornelia was young, serious, and, Aurelia admitted, well matched to her son's flammable future. The wedding tied Julius to the faction that carried Marius's name like a banner and Sulla's name like a curse. The dictators glare, 82 to 81 BC. Wars end, but they do not conclude. They pivot. Sulla entered Rome and wrote the city's law in the sharp tense of victory. He became dictator, a title that in the Republic was meant to be temporary, like winter. Sulla made it a season he controlled. He posted prescription lists, names to be killed legally, property to be confiscated as if it had committed treason. Power now had stationery. Somewhere between the ink and the crowd, Julius's name began to circulate, not always written, but spoken by men who wanted to please the victor. Sulla ordered Julius to divorce Cornelia. The command was framed as logic, the way execution is framed as hygiene. Divorce would be a ritual of obedience. Refusal would be a signature in blood. Julius refused. He refused with a calm that made even his friends uneasy. Gifts were sold, loyal allies arranged hiding places. The city that had given him language now taught him a tougher dialect, silence and speed. He vanished along back roads, sleeping where the map blurred, bribing the right centurion at the right checkpoint. The twist of the chapter is not merely survival, but identity. The boy who had worn duty like a borrowed cloak now chose it, even at sword point. The story could have ended there, another name on Sulla's tidy list. But Sulla, warned by those who pleaded for clemency, is said to have muttered, "In this boy there are many Mariuses." Mercy was granted, but it tasted like an omen, the kind where the gods save you to watch what you will do next. The narrow gate, 81 to 80 BC. Exile is a teacher without patience. Julius slipped away to Asia Minor, trading Rome's marble for the dry logic of campaign tents. In Mytilene, amid ropes, sails, and the smell of pine pitch, he learned how orders travel from mouth to cohort, and how a commander's eyes can be more persuasive than his sword. He fought, and he distinguished himself, a word Rome used for men who could be noticed on a field of thousands. For saving a fellow citizen's life, he received the Corona Civica, the civic crown of oak leaves, one of the few awards a Roman could wear in the city without being accused of wearing his own resume. It was a small circle of leaves, but it closed around his future like a seal. In the long hours between alarms, Julius read. He read Sallust and Ennius, Greek historians and military treatises. He read not as a scholar but as a practitioner harvesting strategies. When legates debated supply lines, Julius listened more than he spoke. When veterans grumbled about pay, he learned that loyalty is arithmetic, rations, rest, respect. Lessons beneath the standard, 80 to 79 BC. Campaign life taught him that discipline is a kind of kindness. It saves more lives than it forbids pleasures. He learned how to make a camp that could sleep without fear, how to read weather in the tone of the sea, how to quiet a panic before it became a stampede. He practiced oratory in the tense half-dark, shaping phrases as if sharpening blades. Words would be his first weapon. Legions would be the echo. Messages from Rome arrived like thin threads across water. He heard of fortunes reversed, alliances revised, of Sulla's power growing taller than the Senate that had allowed it. Yet distance did not make him smaller. It made his ambitions measurable. A city that once felt impossibly large now seemed a structure with doors. Then news bent the road. Sulla died in 78 BC. The letter read by lamplight set the tense shadows moving. Men around the brazier spoke his name, Caesar, with new arithmetic. If the dictator's glare had dimmed, then a man who had refused that glare might walk daylight again. The return to a different city, late 78 to 84 BC in memory. Conclusion. Julius returned toward Rome as a veteran with a civic crown and a private theorem. Rome rewards the brave who calculate. The city he approached was not the one he had left. Streets remember, so do factions. He re-entered a Rome that had learned to negotiate with fear and to admire it in the same men. At home, Aurelia saw a man where a boy had departed. She measured not only his height but his quiet, and she understood. Grief had initiated him. Exile had refined him. He He began to speak in courts, prosecuting corrupt governors, turning the forum into a theater where truth and humiliation shared the same stage. Audiences discovered a voice that could comb chaos into order, clear, cutting, controlled. But Chapter 1 does not end with triumph. It ends with direction. The laurel on the household altar, the shadow of Marius, the command to divorce Cornelia, the civic crown won far from home. These were not scattered scenes. They formed a vector pointing toward a life that would make the Republic test its hinges. Julius had learned 3 theorems. 1. Family grants a name, but choice grants a destiny. 2. Power is not merely taken, it is performed, in court, in camp, in ceremony. 3. The city that tries to break you is also the city that will one day chant your name. He stepped into the forum with these theorems in his pocket, like folded maps. Message: what the chapter leaves behind. Greatness is not a lightning strike, it is a sequence. A boy inherits a rumor of divinity, a teenager absorbs grief, a young man defies a dictator and earns a crown for saving a stranger. Destiny, in Rome's grammar, is written in acts, not adjectives. By the time Sulla's funeral smoke thinned, Julius Caesar had become something Rome recognized and feared. A man who could refuse, remember, and return. The curtain falls on Chapter 1 with Caesar poised at the city's edge, his mother's lessons in his bones, his uncle's legend in his ear, and the forum ahead, no longer a place to approach, but a stage to command. History holds more secrets than we can imagine. Subscribe now and be here when the next chapter unfolds. Chapter 2, The Hunted, 83 to 74 BC. When your name appears on a dictator's kill list, Rome offers you only 2 doors, one marked exile, the other marked death. Shadows over Rome, 83 to 82 BC. Civil war gnawed at Rome's marble bones. Streets once crowded with merchants now trembled under the tramp of soldiers loyal not to the Senate but to men. On one side stood Gaius Marius, aging yet unyielding, his victories over foreign tribes now banners for his political faction. On the other stood Lucius Cornelius Sulla, fresh from campaigns in the east, hardened by war and ambition, sharpened like a whetted gladius. For Julius, this was not a distant struggle of giants. It was family. He had just married Cornelia, the daughter of Lucius Cornelius Cinna, one of Marius's staunchest allies. Marriage had bound him to the Marian cause more tightly than any oath. In 82 BC, Sulla marched on Rome and took it as only a soldier turned politician could. Decisively, mercilessly. The city fell under his shadow, and the Senate bent like reeds before a storm. The dictators' list. Sulla's victory brought with it a tool as cold as any sword. The prescription list. Names inked on parchment became death warrants. Property was seized, enemies were eliminated, and allies were rewarded with the spoils of their rivals. It was politics as arithmetic, addition for friends, subtraction for foes. One day, Julius learned that his name had entered circulation among Sulla's men. The message soon became official. Divorce Cornelia or join the ranks of the condemned. The demand was dressed in logic. By abandoning his Marian wife, Caesar would signal loyalty to Sulla's new order. But Caesar refused. His answer was quiet but immovable, like stone in a river's path. Refusal meant danger. It meant moving through the city like prey in a forest full of hunters. Flight through the city, Rome's back streets became Caesar's corridors. Friends risked themselves to hide him, slipping him through courtyards and stables, whispering routes away from Sulla's patrols. Gold coins disappeared from his purse into the hands of soldiers who could be persuaded to look the other way. The city, once the heart of his childhood, now beat like a predator's pulse. Any misstep could end with his head displayed in the forum. Yet, in those nights of flight, he learned something priceless. The value of alliances beyond politics. The personal debts and loyalties that could shield a man when laws could not. A dictator's omen. Several of Caesar's allies intervened, pleading with Sulla to spare him. The dictator, perhaps amused, perhaps wary, relented, but his words would cling to Caesar's legend. In this boy, there are many Mariuses. It was not praise, it was prophecy. Sulla spared him, but the mercy was edged with warning. I will let him live, but the Republic may one day regret it. From prey to soldier, 81 to 80 BC. exile became service. Caesar took a commission in Asia Minor, trading Rome's conspiracies for the honest brutality of war. In Mytilene, he fought with distinction, earning the Corona Civica for saving a fellow citizen's life. It was the highest honor Rome could grant one of its own, a crown of oak leaves that allowed its bearer to walk in the forum, even before the Senate, without removing it. This crown was more than decoration. It was survival's proof, courage's receipt, and a silent message to Rome: I am not done. Conclusion and message. The hunted man returned from the edges of empire not as prey, but as a veteran crowned for valor. He had stared into the jaws of political execution and learned the routes through darkness. He understood now that Rome was not merely a city, it was a maze, and every maze had exits for those who knew where to look. Message: survival is not retreat. Sometimes it is reconnaissance. If this story spoke to you, imagine what's still waiting. Join us. Subscribe for the next journey through time. Chapter 3: Ghosts on the Aegean, 75 to 69 BC. They thought they had captured a rich young noble. What they didn't know was that they had invited a storm into their own ship. The voyage interrupted. In 75 BC, Caesar was sailing across the Aegean Sea on his way to Rhodes to study oratory under the famed teacher Apollonius Molon. His ambitions were clear. He wanted to sharpen the weapon of his words as much as the edge of his sword. But the sea, as always, had its own politics. Near the island of Pharmacusa, dark sails cut across the horizon. Cilician pirates, masters of the Mediterranean's shadow economy. Their galleys closed in like wolves on a lone traveler. They boarded his ship swiftly, weapons drawn, eyes scanning for wealth. And they found it, in the form of a well-dressed, confident Roman nobleman in his 20s. Caesar, instead of pleading, studied them with a gaze that unnerved even hardened criminals. The price of a life. The pirates demanded 20 talents of silver for his ransom, a king's fortune to most men. Caesar laughed. You clearly don't know who I am. Make it 50. This was not arrogance without calculation. By raising his own ransom, Caesar reshaped the power dynamic. No longer was he a victim to be pitied, he was a prize to be respected, even feared. The pirates, amused and intrigued, agreed. Caesar dispatched his servants to gather the sum, remaining on the island with his captors. Life among pirates. For 38 days, Caesar lived not as a prisoner, but almost as a guest. He joined their games, exercised on deck, and spoke to them as if they were his subordinates. At night, he read poetry and speeches aloud, then mocked them when they didn't appreciate his artistry. And always with a smile, he promised, "When I am free, I will hunt you down and crucify you." The pirates laughed at the jest. But in Caesar's eyes, there was no jest. Promise kept. When the ransom was paid, the pirates released him near Miletus. Most men would have thanked the gods for survival. Caesar went to the nearest port, gathered a fleet, and returned to the waters of Pharmacusa with Roman soldiers. The hunt was swift. The same pirates who had once guarded him were now bound in chains. True to his word, Caesar ordered them crucified, a Roman punishment for pirates and traitors. Yet he tempered the sentence with a touch of mercy. He slit their throats before the crucifixion, sparing them the slow agony. Even in vengeance, Caesar calculated the message. He was not a man of cruelty, but of inevitable justice. The seeds of reputation. This episode spread across the eastern Mediterranean like wildfire. Stories of the young Roman who laughed at his captors and then destroyed them reached every port. In the eyes of many, Caesar was no longer merely a nobleman. He was a man who could not be cowed, a man who turned misfortune into theater and theater into power. Conclusion and message. The Aegean pirates learned too late that their greatest mistake was not in capturing Caesar, it was in underestimating him. Message. When you are in the hands of your enemy, act as if you own the ship. One day, you just might. The past never sleeps, and neither should your curiosity. Subscribe to follow the whispers of history. Chapter 4. The Consul's Mask, 69 to 60 BC. Rome did not reward the bold simply for their courage. It rewarded those who could wear many faces and choose the right one at the right time. A new stage. Return to Rome, 69 BC. After years of military service and the infamous pirate episode, Caesar returned to Rome in 69 BC to find the city simmering with political rivalry. The Senate was divided between two great camps: the Optimates, aristocrats clinging to traditional senatorial dominance, and the Populares, champions of reform and the common people. Caesar, ever the tactician, aligned himself with the Populares. This was not merely ideology, it was strategy. By siding with the masses, he could challenge the entrenched power of the aristocracy while building his own base. Climbing the cursus honorum, the Roman political career path, the cursus honorum, was as treacherous as any battlefield. Caesar's ascent began with the position of quaestor in 69 BC, serving in Hispania Ulterior, further Spain. This role not only gave him administrative experience, but also exposed him to Rome's far-reaching provinces, where loyalty was built not with speeches, but with roads, justice, and coin. Upon his return, tragedy struck. His beloved wife Cornelia died. Caesar mourned, but he also understood that every loss in Rome was an opportunity to forge new alliances. He married Pompeia, granddaughter of Sulla, in a move that seemed politically contradictory. But this was Caesar's art, to wear the mask that best fit the moment, the triumphs and the scandal. As aedile in 65 BC, Caesar staged lavish public games, filling the streets with gladiators, exotic beasts, and monuments honoring Marius, his old Marian ally. The games won him the adoration of the public, but drew the ire of the Optimates, who saw in him a dangerous populist. Then came the Bona Dea scandal in 62 BC. During a sacred festival attended only by women, a young nobleman named Publius Clodius Pulcher infiltrated the ceremony, allegedly to pursue Pompeia. The incident caused a public outcry. Though Caesar divorced Pompeia, he famously declared, "Caesar's wife must be above suspicion." It was a masterstroke, removing himself from the scandal while reinforcing his image as a man of unimpeachable moral standards, at least in the public eye. Alliance with Pompey and Crassus. By 60 BC, Caesar was ready for the leap to consul, the highest office in the Republic. But Rome was no place for solitary ambition. He brokered a secret alliance with two of the most powerful men in the city, Pompey the Great, the celebrated general, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome. This pact, the first triumvirate, was not enshrined in law, but sealed in mutual advantage. Pompey provided military prestige, Crassus brought financial power, and Caesar offered political genius and the favor of the masses. Together, they could bypass the Senate's opposition and shape the Republic to their will. Wearing the consul's mask, 59 BC. As consul, Caesar played the dual role of reformer and enforcer. He pushed through laws granting land to veterans and curbing the exploitation of provinces by corrupt governors. Yet behind the scenes, he was consolidating power, preparing for a command that would take him far from Rome, but never out of its reach. Conclusion and message. By 59 BC, Caesar had mastered the art of Roman politics, not by being one man, but by being many. He could be the grieving widower, the generous benefactor, the moral guardian, and the calculating conspirator, all without losing the loyalty of his followers. Message. In the Republic, survival was not about who you truly were, but about who you could convincingly be. Chapter 5. The Rubicon's Shadow, 49 BC. Once the die is cast, even the greatest empire cannot turn it back. The end of an alliance. By 50 BC, the first triumvirate that had once dominated Roman politics was crumbling. Crassus had fallen at the disastrous Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, leaving Caesar and Pompey the Great as uneasy rivals. Pompey, once Caesar's ally and son-in-law, now aligned himself with the Senate's Optimates, who feared Caesar's growing power after years of conquest in Gaul. The Senate, led by Pompey's allies, issued an ultimatum. Caesar must disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. It was a political death sentence. Without the protection of his legions, he would face prosecution, exile, or worse. Standing at the river Ouse, in the chill of January 49 BC, Caesar led his 13th Legion south through the Italian countryside. They reached a small river marking the northern boundary of Italy, the Rubicon. Crossing it with an army was treason, an act of war against the Senate itself. Caesar paused. History would remember this moment for a single phrase he is said to have spoken: "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. With that, his men marched across. The Rubicon's waters carried not just soldiers, but the fate of the Republic. Rome in panic, news of Caesar's advance spread like wildfire. The Senate, unprepared for open war, fled Rome with Pompey, retreating south to gather forces. For the people of Rome, it was as if a storm was rolling down from the north, a storm they could neither stop nor predict. Caesar, master of speed and surprise, seized city after city without significant bloodshed. He presented himself not as a tyrant, but as a liberator, forbidding looting and violence, ensuring the populace saw him as a bringer of order, not chaos. The twist. Pompey escaped. Caesar's real target was Pompey, but the general, avoiding a pitched battle, withdrew across the Adriatic to Greece. Caesar now faced a strategic choice: pursue immediately and risk supply shortages, or secure Italy and Spain first. He chose patience. By stabilizing his rear before striking, Caesar ensured that when the decisive battle came, it would be on his terms. The shadow grows. The crossing of the Rubicon was more than a military maneuver. It was the point of no return. Caesar had cast himself not just against Pompey, but against the entire political order of the Republic. Whatever the outcome, Rome would never be the same. Conclusion and message. The Rubicon's shadow stretched across the Mediterranean, casting light and darkness in equal measure. For Caesar, it was a gamble with everything on the table: glory or ruin, dictatorship or death. Message: there comes a moment when retreat is no longer an option. When it arrives, you must march forward as if the bridge has already burned behind you. Chapter 6, Pharsalus, 48 BC. When two lions meet in the open plain, only one will walk away with the sun at his back. The chase across the Adriatic. By 48 BC, the rivalry between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great had escalated into full civil war. After securing Italy, Caesar crossed the Adriatic Sea in the dead of winter, chasing Pompey to Greece. The crossing was perilous. Pompey's navy, commanded by his admiral Bibulus, controlled the waters. Many of Caesar's ships were scattered or captured, yet Caesar moved with relentless speed, landing a portion of his army in Epirus despite the risks. His forces were smaller, his supply lines stretched, but he was unwilling to give Pompey time to gather more strength. The standoff at Dyrrhachium. Climax 1. Pompey, well supplied and holding the advantage, entrenched himself at Dyrrhachium. Caesar, instead of engaging in a costly assault, built a series of fortifications to trap Pompey's army between his walls and the sea. It was a bold gamble. For weeks, skirmishes raged. Pompey eventually broke through Caesar's lines, forcing Caesar into retreat. It was the first significant setback of his career, but it would not be the last word. The march to Pharsalus. Caesar withdrew into Thessaly, drawing Pompey away from his strong supply base. The Senate urged Pompey to finish the war with a decisive battle. Pompey hesitated. He knew Caesar's skill, but political pressure mounted. Senators wanted Caesar crushed, not merely contained. Finally, Pompey agreed to meet him on the plains near Pharsalus in central Greece. The battle, Climax 2. On the morning of August 9th, 48 BC, Pompey's army, nearly double the size of Caesar's, lined up in perfect order. Caesar's men were battle-hardened veterans, but they were outnumbered and weary from months of campaigning. Pompey planned to let Caesar's troops charge, then counterattack with his superior cavalry on the left flank, crushing Caesar's right and encircling his army. It was a sound plan, until Caesar did something unexpected. Anticipating the cavalry strike, Caesar had hidden a fourth line of infantry behind his right wing. When Pompey's horsemen charged, this reserve force emerged, thrusting spears at the riders' faces, breaking their momentum and throwing the flank into chaos. The cavalry fled. Caesar's troops pressed forward. Pompey's legions, seeing their line collapse, broke and ran. The once proud general abandoned the field, riding to the coast in despair. The twist. From general to fugitive. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge with the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. But Egypt's court, fearing Caesar's wrath, betrayed him. Pompey was murdered on the shores of Alexandria before Caesar could arrive. When Caesar reached the coast and was presented with Pompey's severed head, He wept, not only for a fallen rival, but for the brutal truth of civil war. Rome's greatest sons were killing each other, and foreign kings dared to decide their fates. Conclusion and message. At Pharsalus, Caesar had defied the odds and destroyed the main army of the Optimates. The Republic was now his to shape or to shatter. Message. Victory is not always about having the larger army. It is about shaping the battlefield so that size means nothing. Chapter Seth, Dictator for Life, 46 to 44 BC. The higher a man climbs, the closer he stands to the knife. From civil war to master of Rome. By 46 BC, Julius Caesar had defeated his enemies in a series of swift campaigns. After Pharsalus, he pursued Pompey's remaining supporters across the Mediterranean. In North Africa, at the Battle of Thapsus, 46 BC, he crushed the forces of Cato the Younger and Metellus Scipio. In Spain, at the Battle of Munda, 45 BC, he ended the last resistance of Pompey's sons. Rome had no rival to challenge him. The Senate named him Dictator, first for 10 years and later, in 44 BC, Dictator Perpetuo, Dictator for Life. It was an unprecedented title, one that blurred the line between republic and monarchy. Reforming the Republic, Climax 1. As dictator, Caesar enacted sweeping reforms, debt relief for the poor, expansion of the Senate, adding representatives from Italy and the provinces, calendar reform, creating the Julian calendar, which we still use in modified form today. He granted citizenship to many non-Romans, reorganized provincial administration, and began massive public works. To many, Caesar was restoring order after years of chaos. To others, he was dismantling the Republic itself. The signs of monarchy, Climax. Caesar's behavior began to alarm even his allies. He wore the laurel crown constantly, partly to hide his thinning hair, partly as a symbol of victory. Statues of him stood alongside those of the gods. His image was minted on coins, something no living Roman had dared before. Rumors spread that he intended to declare himself king. In February 44 BC, during the Lupercalia festival, his ally Mark Antony offered him a royal diadem before the crowd. Caesar refused, perhaps as political theater, but the incident deepened fears that he aimed to rule as a monarch in all but name. The conspiracy twist. A group of senators styling themselves liberators decided that killing Caesar was the only way to save the Republic. Among them were men he had pardoned, including Brutus and Cassius. They plotted to strike during a Senate meeting on the Ides of March, March 15, 44 BC, at the theater of Pompey. The Ides of March? Climax 3. That morning, Caesar was warned repeatedly of danger. A soothsayer is said to have told him, "Beware the Ides of March." His wife Calpurnia begged him not to go, disturbed by ominous dreams. But Caesar, confident and perhaps dismissive of omens, attended the Senate session. Inside, the conspirators surrounded him. Casca struck first, slashing at his neck. Blades flashed from every side. Caesar fought back until he saw Brutus, a man he trusted, among the attackers. Ancient sources claim he uttered, "Et tu, Brute," before collapsing beneath 23 stab wounds. The aftermath. The assassins believed they had restored the Republic. Instead, they unleashed chaos. Rome plunged into another civil war, one that would eventually end with the rise of Octavian, later Augustus, the first emperor. Caesar's funeral became a rallying point for the people. Mark Antony's speech stirred the crowd to fury, turning public opinion against the conspirators. Conclusion and message. Caesar's life ended at the peak of his power, proving the ancient truth. In Rome, political heights and mortal danger were the same summit. Message. Power may crown a man's head, but it also paints a target on his back. Chapter 8. The Legacy of Caesar. A man's life may end in an instant, but his shadow can stretch for millennia. The shockwave after his death. When Julius Caesar fell on the Ides of March, 44 BC, Rome was left in shock. His assassination had been meant to restore the Republic, but instead, it shattered the fragile political order. Civil war erupted once again, drawing in Caesar's loyalists, his assassins, and new contenders for power. The rise of a new order. From the chaos emerged three figures: Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand general; Marcus Lepidus, his master of cavalry; and Gaius Octavian, his adopted son and heir. Together they formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BC, vowing to avenge Caesar's death. The Senate's authority dwindled further. Prescriptions were issued, lists of enemies to be executed, and their property seized. The streets of Rome ran red once more, but this time in Caesar's name, the death of the liberators. In 42 BC, the armies of the Second Triumvirate met those of Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in Macedonia. The result was decisive. Both leaders of the conspiracy took their own lives. The cause of the Republic died with them, from Caesar to empire. The alliance of Antony, Lepidus, and Octavian did not last. Ambition and rivalry tore them apart. Octavian ultimately triumphed over Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, becoming the sole ruler of Rome. In 27 BC, Octavian was granted the title Augustus, marking the birth of the Roman Empire. The republic that Caesar had sought to control was gone, replaced by the imperial system his own career had paved the way for, Caesar's enduring influence. Even in death, Caesar's mark on history was indelible. The Julian calendar reformed time itself. His military strategies were studied for centuries. His writings, like Commentary de Bello Gallico, became classics of Latin literature. His name became a title, Caesar, used by emperors for centuries, and echoed in Kaiser and Tsar. Conclusion and message. Caesar's life was a story of ambition, brilliance, and fatal overreach. He ended the Republic not with a declaration, but with a march across a small river and a series of choices from which there was no turning back. His shadow would stretch across history, from the marble halls of Rome to the palaces of emperors, from medieval kings to modern leaders who saw in him a model of power. Message: legacies are not measured in years lived, but in the worlds they leave behind. Great stories never end, they only wait for the next listener. Subscribe and continue the journey with us.